No matter how chaotic the world might be, we can always guarantee that the one constant is Bethesda working on a game and not telling us until 3 months beforehand, followed by everyone getting hyped up about it while simultaneously knowing that the delivered product is probably going to be about as buggy as mid-90s 3D animated movies. But nonetheless, here are my predictions for what's going to happen with The Elder Scrolls 6, because everyone seems to be doing it in the last 3 years. Now, this is going to be a very grounded video. This isn't going to be a giant fan fest saying that I want the game to take place in literally every province. And we're going to be looking at it strictly from the trend in recent Elder Scrolls games and where Bethesda is going with the franchise. And that being said as well, if I don't choose the province that you want to see, that's alright. You don't have to get angry at me. This is again just a theory, this is just an opinion video, and I could be wrong just as well as anyone else could. But I hope you stick around anyways and just listen to the reasoning. Because contrary to popular belief, opinions are actually kind of good. You know, they encourage conversation and stuff. Anyways, now that that's all out of the way, thank God, let's take a look at the different provinces and the possible locations for Elder Scrolls 6. I've broken it down, or rather just kind of let Bethesda do that for me, and the possible locations that we have in Tamriel are High Rock, Hammerfell, Skyrim, Cyrodiil, Vallon, Summerset Isles, Elsewhere, Blackmarsh, and Morrowind. So that's what's on Tamriel. We also have Akavir, which is an entirely different and separate continent. This, of course, housing its own varied races and never appearing in a Bethesda game. I thought we would go through kind of each area and just give my reasoning as to why I think they are or aren't a likely scenario. First of all, let's go over the two Beast provinces of Elsewhere and Blackmarsh, home of the Khajiit and Argonians respectively. It's true in the Elder Scrolls franchise that the player base is largely favoritive towards these two races, and I totally get it, they're cats and lizards. That's really interesting. You don't see that too often in games. In fact, I would say that most of the fan theories I've seen in the last few years have taken place in either Elsewhere or Blackmarsh. However, I must say that I think these are very unlikely scenarios. Now hear me out, I know a lot of you are going to be angry at me for saying that we shouldn't have a game that's entirely made up of cat people, and I'm all for that, believe me, I think that would be hilarious and cool. But when you look at Bethesda's history with the Elder Scrolls and even the Fallout franchise, we see a trend over the last few years. Bethesda has shown the trend that they want to make everything as accessible as possible to the player base. And we've seen that recently with the transition between Fallout 3's mechanics being more RPG-like and Fallout 4 being appealing to a more casual audience. And as we all know, Fallout 4 made a boatload of money. Like, a lot of money. Like, if you took it all, soaked it in water, froze it, turned it into a money iceberg, it would be big enough to sink the Titanic. And if I was a company, I would want to continue that trend. A lot of that money actually came from casual fans. So picture your coworker. He plays Call of Duty and maybe Battlefield if it's on sale. Months and months and months go by, and he keeps hearing about this other game called Fallout 4, and he sees that it has cool shooting mechanics that remind him of Call of Duty. He ends up buying it, liking it, because it's not too hard to get into and he can pick up and play it. Now he's invested in that series. So you've opened up a huge market of casual fans that are going to pay more money. And the fact of the matter is there are simply more casual fans than there are hardcore gamers. So as a business strategy, it's what's best for Bethesda. And keeping on that train of thought of it being a business strategy, how good of a strategy do you think it's going to be to try to appeal to a casual audience that's going to give you a lot of money by making a game filled with cats and lizards? If a casual fan, let's call him Carl now, sees that this game is populated with only cats and lizards, he's more likely to be turned off, and thus Bethesda isn't going to be getting their money from him. So it's much more beneficial if they keep the game setting in one of the more humanoid provinces. Therefore, it's in my humble opinion that Elsewhere and Blackmarsh are not likely candidates. This is without mentioning that Blackmarsh is also an extremely difficult province to navigate according to the lore, and Elsewhere features not only humanoid cats, but cats of all different styles depending on when they were born. I really don't think Bethesda wants to animate that many different types of humanoids that you can interact with. It's much easier just to make them all look like people. Moving on, let's talk about Vallon, home of the Wood Elves. I feel like while this would actually be one of the more interesting settings, it again is a little bit unlikely. That's due again to the difficulty of actually creating this province. In the lore, cities in Vallon don't actually stay in one place, and neither do the trees, which most of them are made in. Many trees and cities are actually mobile and will move across the entire land. That would be a very difficult system for Bethesda to figure out, and they would probably have to remove it entirely. However, I don't think it's an impossible scenario, as really the lore in Vallon isn't that much different from general fantasy lore as Morrowind was, and there was a game already set there. Moving over to the Summerset Isles, home of the High Elves, I think the main problem with this scenario is simply that the Summerset Isles seem to be a much more urbanized and orderly area. There wouldn't be as much to explore as there would be in a place even like Cyrodiil, which although is a much more urbanized province, is also much larger than the Summerset Isles, therefore it boasts more wilderness to explore. Now the flip side to this is that Bethesda can technically scale the game in any way they desire, and if this game were to be set in the Summerset Isles, I would expect it to be at least as large as the Skyrim map. Now while we're on the topic of different islands outside of Tamriel, let's talk about Akavir for a second. I think this would actually be one of the most interesting places to base the game. However, the task of creating an entire new lore for all the areas would be a very daunting one even for Bethesda. And while I do think that in the future there's going to be some contact with Akavir and even maybe a main story centered around it, I don't think there will be a main game set there apart from maybe some DLC content. Let's move over to Cyrodiil. Now, we're talking about more urbanized and more casual locations. This is probably the best one you're going to get. However, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I don't think it's going to be set in Cyrodiil, seeing as the game before last was already set there. And unless the game took place far in the future, or far in the past, or some catastrophic event had happened, there would be very similar locations. The same goes for Morrowind, however, I do think it's a little bit more likely than Cyrodiil, because that did have a catastrophic event happen that did change how the province looks. Do I even have to mention Skyrim? The next game isn't going to take place in Skyrim. It's not. So that leaves us with two. We have High Rock up in the northwest, and Hammerfell right below it. High Rock being the home of the Bretons and the Orcs, who are in an eternal struggle between each other as to who wants to get control over parts of the province, and it's regarded as the most medieval fantasy of all the provinces. If you were to think about magic and Merlin, King Arthur style thing, it would be High Rock. Which does fit into what I was saying earlier about Bethesda wanting to appeal to a casual audience that will recognize a location and be familiar with it instead of being scared away by cats and lizards. High Rock might be the best place to do that, as it combines what we recognize as regular people, as well as it being bordered by two more humanoid provinces, Hammerfell and Skyrim. And let's take a look at Hammerfell as well. The Redguards have been a little bit downplayed in recent Elder Scrolls games, very rarely appearing and having any major roles. However, it would be a very interesting setting because of its borders with various different provinces and climates. The western side of the province is a very coastal area, while the uppermost borders High Rock and Skyrim, which introduces colder climates and mountains, while the eastern border is across Cyrodiil, which is a much more temperate climate. And we can also add in a giant desert in the middle. This is a huge variation in locales that can really help the game feel different when you're exploring. It also borders a crazy amount of provinces and acts as an access point for the Summerset Isles. Therefore, it wouldn't be out of the question to see a large variety of races. So we've got High Rock and Hammerfell. Which one will reign supreme? Well, in my humble opinion, at the end of the day, I have to go with Hammerfell. While I do believe High Rock is a more safe choice, Hammerfell offers a big variation in the gameplay and the locales we've seen in the past few games. It gives you locations that you're familiar with from Skyrim and Cyrodiil, but then adds in new locales like deserts that could be very interesting for players to explore. Therefore, I believe that Hammerfell is going to be the setting for the Elder Scrolls 6. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Tell me why. Be respectful in the comments when you do, though. Like this video if you haven't already. I would be super appreciative. And I am PattyJack. I will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful day.